All right, good afternoon, good people. I hope everybody had a good weekend. As we continue on, make sure you follow on the syllabus and see where we get in the reading. As I open up the bank, hopefully you got a chance to read at least the entire this chapter. Um, Anything you want to discuss or explain or that you found interesting from the early portions of this chapter before that you remember from memory without looking at your notes? We'll definitely use those in a moment, but just anything at all that you found interesting that stood out that you learned from this chapter so far. Well, make sure that you're definitely clear and keen on the things that you want to learn at the end of this chapter. These include the key rights that inmates possess. We want to be able to evaluate the application. And again, like beyond just memorizing information, we want to make sure that we understand how to apply these processes as we talked about. Hopefully this is never one of us, but in case we're incarcerated or anybody that we know and love ever is, this kind of information definitely can be helpful and beneficial beyond this class. But definitely something you want to familiarize yourself with on multiple levels as it relates to being a criminal justice professional. Most of these most of these you've heard before. First Amendment, the Fourth and Eighth, all of which make up our bill, are part of our Bill of Rights. And then ultimately the 14th Amendment as well, although we'll talk about how multiple, including even the Fifth and the Sixth, also play a part as well. We want to discuss what we even mean by prisoners' rights. We talked about this a little bit last week in the abstract in terms of, again, what does it mean to have, rights, the right to do what? We want to be able to discuss the foundation of where this came from. So the same way that we talked about in earlier portions, the foundations of our correction system and how it evolved from the Code of Hammurabi and out of the Roman Empire into what we have now through various phases. We want to be able to summarize the legal services that are available to inmates and then finally discuss the rights that are not given to inmates. Again, all American citizens have certain inalienable rights. Some you lose when you are incarcerated, but not all. We talk about rights. This is just a claim by an individual or group of individuals that the state has a duty to fulfill. We discussed when we first introduced this topic, some of the right to do what, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. And again, as young criminal justice majors who are hopefully very soon going to be the leaders in this profession, I really challenge you to think about these things, in concrete ways. And then when we talk about the statutes throughout this chapter and in future chapters, the statutes kind of give the rationale behind some of these rights. So make sure you make some time to understand those as well. And again, as you take notes, the notes are only helpful, I think a lot of times, and hopefully this will be something that as we go forward is stressed more in a class like University 101 in terms of just how to take notes. Because a lot of times I think the students think that just taking this and putting it down on a piece of paper or taking bold print and writing it word for word back in your book, that's actually like accomplishing something. That's not, you're wasting a lot of time doing that actually. That's not proper note taking. The purpose of note taking is to make sure that you get all this complex information and you can condense it and summarize the important things you're supposed to remember about it. But just writing down these definitions although it can be helpful. That's not going to really, like, again, this is why in class after class after class, I'll ask about, hey, explain the legalistic view. It should be some easy extra credit points, are the students aren't able to grasp these concepts because we're just, writing, transcribing things from a book onto a notebook. That's not the educational process whatsoever. So make sure that you also are writing down some of the things that are discussed as well. And then also the author gives you a lot of different anecdotes and stories. They kind of also speak to how these things, play out. And what this just speaks to here is that, and again, make sure you're listening while you're taking notes and you're also taking down what's being communicated verbally. What you see here are just simply like the different perspectives about what we as citizens believe should be the rights of inmates. And it comes from 3 different perspectives. One from a strictly legalistic perspective, another from a crime control perspective, and another from a humanistic perspective. The legalistic view, as we talked about, there are statutes and there's a constitution in this country that says that, people are entitled to certain rights under, given circumstances. Under the legalistic view, inmates should be geared within that light. Another view, and this has been shared, by many students. This is probably the common view in America, because again, when we hear crime, in spite of all the data that we see that most people that go to prison are nonviolent drug offenders, so it's a bunch of crackheads and heroin addicts. In spite of this mountains and mountains of data, when people hear crime, those kind of things go out the window and people just hear murder, rapists, murder, rapists, murder, rapists. So we want to punish people as harshly as possible. As we talked about again, in the foundational aspects of criminal justice, our purpose of criminal justice is not just to punish. Our purpose of criminal justice is not just to punish. The same way, again, all of us as young people, we've been punished when we did things wrong in our households. Our parents weren't just trying to make us feel bad, which is the goal of punishment. Under the crime control model, the belief is that, again, that you need to punish and deter this as much as that. The best way to deter crime is to punish. And if people get punished, if people get locked up, that'll make the crime rate go down and people will learn. If we bring people into prison and we treat them too well, what lesson will they learn? I often hear the ridiculous notion sometimes, of that people want to go to jail. That people who say that are people that actually ever been to jail and prison. I've worked in a prison before. I have been to jail. It's way better on this side, dog. Anybody that's telling you, otherwise is what we like to call in social sciences a fucking moron. Ain't nothing good or sweet about being in no jail. No matter how, even if you're in a corporate prison, the type that all the Trump campaign people went to, it's still better to be on the outside than to be there. These, and again, you can take whichever perspective you like, but there are some perspectives that objective facts line up more than others. And it's just not factual that, prisons have been this kind of club med type atmosphere. In fact, quite the contrary. But the notion has been that we need to make prisons a little bit tougher, and that'll show them, and that'll teach these crystal meth addicts not to do the crime by taking the libraries out of the prisons and making sure that there's no GED programs. That'll show them for sure, and that'll make it where they never come back. The foundation of these rights include the Bill of Rights, and the specific amendments in the Constitution that are germane to discussion include the 14th Amendment, the 10th, 8th, 6th, and 4th and 1st Amendments. And again, right, so keep in mind, like the purpose of the Constitution, and again, please make sure that you're listening. And listening is it's a verb. You got to work and actively listen. The same way, the only way for me to effectively work out is I have to I have to be an active participant. You have to make sure. That's why again, it's I encourage you to have the cameras on and to be focused, not getting your hair done, not working your 2-3 jobs, but to actually be here in the moment so that you can listen actively and retain this information. If you got to see it on the paper, any pop quizzes that might be coming up, or the midterm exam in a couple of weeks. That again, the purpose of this is to make sure that we keep everybody protected. The purpose of the Constitution and laws, period. We have to keep people protected, but we also want to do it in such a way where we don't infringe upon their rights. And again, as we talk about rules and policy, keep in mind the rule and policy for this class. I've explained this several times, so I won't go over in too much detail again, but as of today, Latasia Richardson is the only person that's fully present. And she was here at the beginning of class. Our class always starts at 2 p.m. On Wednesday, it's going to start at 2 p.m. Next Monday, just for fun, it's going to start at 2 p.m. Probably the Monday after that, it's going to start at 2 p.m. as well. So we'll always start at that time. Students need to be in class within the first 5 minutes. The same way, again, you're being prepared here for your professional socialization. So you don't want to get into the habit of showing up late to places, particularly when oftentimes the social expectation is that you're going to show up late for places. So if you're not here within the first 5 minutes, of course, you forfeit your points for the day. And then you'll need to be on camera throughout the entirety. And as I discussed, each attendance point is just, in-class point is just a half a point. So these points are not, terribly punitive if you have to miss class a time or two. Now, if you miss class for several weeks and stuff, those things add up. And many of you all have done that to the point where it might be a better option to drop this class. But the most important thing, the most invaluable part of the lecture is the information itself. So if you're not able to be in a position where you can be on camera or feel comfortable being on camera, it's still always good to show up when you can, provided you're able to really give it the full attention that I think will be beneficial to you. And if you're not able to do that, again, every lecture is recorded and posted after class. So this information will be available to you where you can give it your undivided attention. We talked about the role that the Constitution plays in establishing prisoners' rights. We also have many court statutes where legal precedents are established that, again, determine how rights are going to be mandated out across time. Now, precedents and statutes can change. It can be challenged. But again, there are cases that would have been argued in 1948, a case that might have been argued in 1973, a case that might have been argued in 1988. Really look at these things. I think this is some of the most interesting aspects of, criminal justice. A lot of people get into Law and Order and stuff like that, and a bunch of crime shows that have a bunch of dramatic, high, stakes crimes. Those are very rare. And quite frankly, most murders overwhelmingly go unsolved. There's not a lot of incentive to go solve. Do your own research on that, but it's the truth. Black people get killed in Chicago all the time. Ain't nobody doing no Law and Order to try and find, get to the bottom of them crimes, man. Somebody snitched, they get them. If not, tough luck. If there's a massacre or somebody important in white gets killed, oftentimes these are things are adjudicated differently. So the precedents that you'll see in your textbook are not going to be as exciting as some of those TV cases. But I think will be very interesting nonetheless to you. So really do check them out. And a lot of them, again, as a criminal justice professional, you're going to see again and again and again and again. So they'll become second nature. So again, Miranda versus Arizona one of the more famous ones is an actual case where, again, dude, like, his name was Miranda in the state of Arizona. He got arrested. Said later, hey, he didn't know what his rights were, particularly his right to like remain silent, because he ended up telling on himself. But lawyers came like, wait, he didn't have to do none of that. It's your job, prosecutors, to prove the case. I don't have to say anything at all. Again, and that's why, like, it can be hard to like prosecute police officers and people like that, because there's a protection against self-incrimination, which again, everybody has, including prisoners. One of the more important cases, for example, and this is where, like, so a lot of times you may hear something about like, so I know there was a documentary 2 years ago called 13th on Netflix, really interesting, thought-provoking documentary I highly recommend you check out. And it kind of like paralleled the modern prison system to slavery. That would be a bit of an overstatement. Like slavery was like a really jacked up institution. So like, like a prisoner, like if you went to jail and you were a slave of the state, if you will, your children and your grandchildren would not necessarily have to be slaves of the state. In American chattel slavery, that was the case. In American chattel slavery, you had no rights whatsoever. So to equate, modern prison institutionalization is messed up as it is. To compare that to, chattel slavery would be, a bridge too far. However, the famous case, and again, these are the kind of things that you're going to need to know in preparing for the exam. Don't just try and memorize them, understand them. Ruffin versus Commonwealth of Virginia, where it states that the prisoner has a consequence of his crime, not only forfeited his liberty, but all his personal rights except those which the law in its humanity accords to him. He is for the time being a slave of the state. And again, you'll make the note of this, like this is not a history class, but from other classes you take it, I'm sure you're aware that the Civil War ended in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation signed shortly after. So in 1871, this law was put on the book. So when we talk about prisoners' rights, the first phase, and again, these historical developments are important. We talked about in the first couple chapters, the evolution of the criminal correction system. Again, the Code of Hammurabi, to like, the barbaric punishments in Rome where they were drawing quarter people, they were tarring feather people, chopping off people's hands. In early America, initially some of those same things were done, but we thought, okay, maybe we should be a little bit more civilized and we should have a more proportional system where not every punishment should be done the same. So we had like, again, a reform era. We did had a medicalization era where we thought that, okay, crime is more a product of your environment. And if you live in certain environments and you grow up around certain people, you're more likely to turn to crime. It's not because you're just a bad person. And then the more recent phase, the tough on crime phase, which you'll be writing about in your papers, which will be coming up due soon. And it talks about, again, how the prison explosion populated a great deal because there was such an emphasis on getting tough on crime. We see these same phases play out in the prisoners' rights, in discussing prisoners' rights as well. So again, the first period, and it's in the late 1800s, where again, prisoners were essentially looked at as slaves, had virtually no rights at all. They could treat you however they wanted to. Ultimately, our country got a little bit more civilized where we wanted to have a few more rights for prisoners. But then, again, folks like Malik got upset about, giving folks in prison education and stuff, allowing them to potentially, again, get legal services. So we had to take a lot of those things out of the prison through the crime control response. The hands-off doctrine was a really important concept. And again, this is something that you'll see for sure on the midterm exam in some capacity. So please study it closely. I'll leave it up for a couple of moments and then I'll discuss it in more detail because it's a really important concept. Again, I know at times you want to really labor to take notes, and I encourage that. Keep in mind always, all of this is taken directly from your textbook. So if you've been keeping up with the reading, you should not have to write down as much as my notes. And then secondly, even though you want to keep up with this stuff, again, the most important thing is what's being verbally communicated. You all understand that, correct? You all understand that when I verbally communicate these things, that at some point, I expect you all to be able to communicate them back to me. With this in mind, is there anything that you have questions about so far? I will highly encourage you to go back and look at this stuff. You may not need to look at it all. Again, I think a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward. But also as you go through this chapter, make sure you see how it ties back to some of the earlier chapters as well. Again, we're walking you through history from our correction system in the 1800s up to the modern day. And initially, like when prisons were first created, there was not very many federal regulations. So today, for example, right, like if a woman is pregnant in prison, there are regulations that make it where they have to, like, provide for her health care in the delivery of the baby. Now, as we'll talk about later on, ladies, in the second half of the class, sometimes that might literally involve you being handcuffed to the bed while you're delivering your baby, true story. But they have to provide medical services for you. But back during the times of the hands-off doctrine, and this is the part where I need y'all to be making sure that you're listening and you're hearing me. Because again, I need y'all to be able to explain these things back to me. Don't just tell me again, like, what the hands-off doctrine was and what it did, but make sure you understand what it meant to have a hands-off doctrine. What it meant was, since there was no rules and regulations from the government saying that prisons have to do this or that, it kind of left the prison administrators on their own. That whatever they feel like doing in terms of how they ran the prison, they would be able to do. Again, these people were locked up, and keep in mind, we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s at this stage. At this stage, like, most Americans, they didn't care one way or the other. It wasn't anybody that they knew that was going to be locked up. At this time, we're pretty much only locking up the most dangerous and threatening of criminals. So society didn't really care that much what was going on behind those prison doors one way or the other.
So they was basically like kind of just doing whatever they want in the prison, like what they, okay.
Absolutely. No rules whatsoever. And the main, thing was to try and, like, enact discipline. Now, keep in mind at this time, Savannah, that, like when we talk about the word penitentiary, we talked about before, the aim initially was to have people repent, that they were going to be reformed, they was going to literally find Jesus, and they were going to become better people. But as far as like, hey, I got the right to read some books in here. I got the right to a window. I have a right to attorney. Like, nah, none of that stuff was happening yet. And again, keep in mind, we talk about, and make sure y'all staying with me. When we talk about, rights, the first thing we ask, Savannah, was the right to do what? And our rights to do what? It's what's captured in our Constitution. It's really important that you know these days, young people, because otherwise your rights could be taken away from you. It's really, and if you don't know what your rights are, it's a lot easier to take them away. So our right to do what in the First Amendment, our right to do what in the Fourth Amendment, 6th, 8th, 10th, 14th. But at this stage, none of those rights were, really considered for prisoners during the hands-off doctrine. And again, hands-off, it means that the government is taking a hands-off approach. The government is taking a hands-off approach. Like, look, if this is your prison, Latasia, you handle it. We don't really want to know or care what's going on. We got a hands-off approach. Y'all hear me? It's pretty straightforward, right? I'm going to break this down for me later on, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm taking a lot of time with it because it's important, okay? So go back and like it again. Look, I went through it very quickly. Please go back and read it again. It won't take you long. So through pretty much the 1870s up to like 1960, the hands-off doctrine is what held sway. Government's like, look, whatever they do in that prison, that's on them. But in the 1960s, what were some other important events that was going on in the 1960s? So what's another really important historical event going on in the 1960s? Any other historical events? I know this ain't a history class, but work with me. Give you one extra credit point. You don't lose anything if you guess. What are some other important historical events in the 1960s?
The Civil Rights Movement.
Say it again.
Civil Rights Movement.
Very good, Savannah. One extra credit point. Now, I know somebody else knew that, man. Like, y'all be really like cheating yourselves by, your silence. Y'all gonna cost yourselves some money in y'all place of employment one day. The people that speak up oftentimes are able to get notice and proceed a lot faster. So don't cheat yourself that way. And again, like I said, you don't lose anything by getting it wrong. See, as a civil rights movement, and it's not a coincidence, Savannah, that civil rights means exactly what it says. It ain't just civil rights for Black people marching in the street. Like, it's again that what exactly are your rights as a American citizen? That for Black people in particular, even though we had become American citizens since 1865, there were a lot of efforts, like Commonwealth versus Virginia, for example, Latasia. There were a lot of efforts to curb those civil rights. Prisons in particular were sites of gross abuses of civil rights. And what race of people do you think oftentimes will be housed in these prisons? You guessed it, Black people. So it was important, if we were going to deal with civil rights during this period, it required that we not only deal with trying to protect people's rights to go to school, to shop where they want to live where they want to say what they want to, but also certain rights within institutions as well. So the high water mark again here is 1960 to 1980. And one of the things you have to speak about in your papers is the political dynamics during this time, which I hope you're paying keen attention to. And one of the more important rights was just religious freedom. Do you have the right to practice your religious values? Again, not just if you're part of the dominant religious group of Christianity. What if you're Jewish? What if you're Rastafarian? What if you belong to one of the several Native American religious sects? A really controversial one, and whenever you see something in italics, make sure that you study it closely. So again, we talked about statutes. I gave y'all one already. Commonwealth versus Virginia. If I ask y'all on Wednesday, I want y'all to be able to tell me what happened with that without any notes, Latasia. Because you're getting the notes today, right? The notes are only helpful if it helps you remember this stuff when you need it. So if I ask y'all something on Wednesday, I don't think it's an impractical question. Like, in fact, I think it's really a way to get some really easy points. I am telling you the kind of things I want to know. I'm giving you the information. I'm going to tell you where you can find more information. And then I'm going to give you some points if you can spit this back for me. And if you get some of it wrong, okay, you learn from that and you try again. But by the time you see it on a quiz and the exam, it's going to be second nature. So one of the more important cases related to right to privacy was Percornier versus Martinez. And again, look at these cases, young people, they're really interesting. So Martinez, again, like he's in a joint. He get mail, like his girl want to send him stuff, Savannah. His mama want to call him sometimes, baby, how you doing? Do y'all think that the prisoners got a right to listen in on all that? Y'all think that that they should have the right to check his mail? What do y'all think? And why do you think that?
Me personally, I say no, that they shouldn't check like your mail and everything, because at the end of the day, that is your privacy, and what you speak with your family is between y'all. It's between y'all. So I understand they want to make sure, like, I'll just use for example, if somebody, in jail for like murdering somebody, I know they probably want to make sure, see if you're gonna tell your family members, like, like if you're trying to hide something or whatever, but still at the end of the day, that's still your privacy of you speaking to your family members or friends.
Good. One extra credit point for that. I like the way, again, like I said, like I value critical thinking. So not only in answering the question, but you took it a step deeper and giving a real world example. And you're right. Those are the kind of things they're looking for. Like, okay, look, we want to be able to listen in if they, if they talk about they commit a crime. The mail thing will be that the guardians of the jail, they have a responsibility, Savannah, to keep everybody there safe. So we want to make sure that ain't nobody mailing you, razor blades or some weapon that you can sneak in here to hurt people. But there are ways that we can check that, right? Without actually going through your mail. So eventually the Supreme Court agreed with you, Savannah. And it's like, look, we understand that you got to keep people safe. We understand that, you want to monitor some of the things that's going on, but no, that even in here, Malik, people still have a right to privacy. So the same way they're like, look, if, the government does not have a right to just listen in on my phone calls, even if I'm doing something illegal. They don't have a right to be checking my mail. Now, if they want to, if they do think that I'm doing something illegal, what do they need to do? One extra credit point. If they do think I'm doing something illegal, what they got to do? It's ways to go around that. Don't overthink it. What they got to do? Come on, criminal justice majors. This is sad and depressing. They got to get a warrant. So the same way a search warrant, like, again, they can get a warrant to tap into your phone. They can get a warrant to have to search your mail, but they got to give a judge a whole bunch of evidence. Like, look, we think Savannah might be a terrorist, and this school may get blown up if we don't begin to survey her options. But they got to give the judge a bunch of evidence to show that they have reason to believe that. Again, it can't just be off of no reason. Keep these things in mind. I ain't got a chance to see it yet, so don't spoil it for me. But if you have HBO, are able to download HBO Max, there's a film out, Judas and the Black Messiah, and it's speaking about Fred Hampton, right? And Fred Hampton, his constitutional rights were, he was a Black Panther, and his constitutional rights were violated. That again, they spying on him, they infiltrated him, and they didn't get any warrant there, and they were making up evidence on him to say that he was more of a physical threat than he was. There are many cases like that, unfortunately, throughout this period, and this is why, again, these rights are really important, particularly for Black people. Again, the right to health care. That if you're pregnant while you're in prison, do we just say, well, hey, too bad for you and your baby. You shouldn't have got locked up. If you're diabetic, hey, too bad about your, I'm sorry if you need your shot. You shouldn't have got locked up. What about things like HIV? Yeah, so the Constitution says, or the Supreme Court has said that, yes, you have a right to health care. So keep these things in mind and make sure, again, you think along with me. Some of y'all spacing out, man. Gaming yourselves and everything, giving all these people all this money up here at Allen University to refuse to learn anything. It's amazing. So please, again, do this for your benefit, not any of ours. The right to health care, again, like one of the things that's concerning, Savannah, if we're going to lock people up 25 to life, that sounds great. You know what that means, Latasia? That we got to pay for that health care for 25 to life. And you know what happens when people get older? Hey, healthcare costs go up. Now, again, if we talk about dangerous murder and rapists, okay, yes, we got to keep these people away from folks. They crazy. So we don't have to just charge that to the gang. But as we talked about in previous chapters, there are people who bounce checks. There are people who stole socks that got 25 to life. We finna pay for their health care for the next 25 years, dog, with your tax dollars? That's cool. Finally, the right to be protected from abuse. That again, it sounds all well and good. You know, we talked about before, the hands-off doctrine previously, right? And most people, again, they don't care what's going on to these prisoners. These are bad people. Who cares? But again, like, you know, for many of us, and God bless y'all if y'all are fortunate, I care because these are our cousins. These are our brothers. This could be some of y'all. I hope not. This system is tricky. So because you're in prison, you know, that means that, you know, that because you like a blood, the Crips get the right to just beat the hell out of you. Like you ain't got no protections from that. You got the, like, again, we talked about, you know, beginning of this chapter, like people got the right to rape dude where he eventually got HIV. Like that's okay. No, the courts say that people have rights to be protected from all of that. There's a common notion sometimes to just want to throw these people away because, okay, they're just criminals. Most of the people in there, man, are Black and brown people that are locked up by a bunch of white people that, statistically speaking, do a lot of the same crimes that they locking these folks up for. Do your own research on that. So it's really important we have this history and context when we have these discussions about prisoners' rights. By my clock, I have 2:37. Let's log out and log back in using the same link at 2:45 p.m. Keeping in mind our same attendance rules. We'll log back in using the same link at make it 2:50. Make it 2:50, we will log back in. I'll see y'all at that time.